So we're taking a little bit of a break from Ephesians for a few weeks. We're going to do 2 weeks in Christmas. We're going to be talking about villains and seekers in the Christmas story. And then the last Sunday, 2 weeks from today of this year, Zach is going to preach for us. And then we'll jump back into Ephesians the first Sunday of January. So we're looking in Matthew chapter 2. We'll be here this Sunday and next Sunday. Usually this text kind of focuses on the wise men or the magi. And we'll be talking about them next Sunday, but today we're going to talk about villains, a villain in this story. Villains are not uncommon to Christmas stories. How many of you like Christmas movies? How many of you watch a lot of Christmas movies during the Christmas season? Okay, I think we all have our taste of Christmas movies that we watch during the Christmas season. So we're going to do a little bit of trivia just to have a little bit of fun starting the sermon out. We're going to talk about some villains in Christmas movies that we should be familiar with. So I will give you the hint and the picture, and you tell me who the villain is and the movie. So number 10, we're going to count down from 10. This bully, good old-fashioned bully, who makes our narrator and friends' lives very hard by ambushing them in the snow. Who's this guy? Who? Did you say it, Ash? Oh. You didn't know? Melissa said it. Who is it? Scott Farkas, that's right, in A Christmas Story. Number 9, we had to throw this in there because there's always a question whether this is a Christmas movie or not, but this villain takes everyone hostage during the office Christmas party to get his hands on the company money, right? Who is it? Hans Gruber. It's a good thing there's a New York City cop in the building. And this is now one of Levi's favorite Christmas movies. Most Christmas movies are not about being alone, but if you find yourself alone, you better have an elaborate scheme to avoid these two hapless burgers known as the Wet Bandits. That's Marv and Harry, right? Home Alone. How about this guy? This villain's a little adorable. Too adorable to be taken as a serious threat in the classic movie Rudolph. This is kind of the abominable snowman, but his name in the movie is what? Bumble. Y'all remember that? That's Bumble. How about this guy? He may be little, but he packs quite a punch to make things difficult for the guy we're always rooting for in this famous Christmas movie, Elf. Elves aren't always nice. This is the angry elf in the movie Elf. How about this guy? This is one of my favorites. This magician is hired to perform at the school's Christmas party. He's described as one of the worst magicians in the world, but when his hat makes a snowman come to life, he goes on a chilly chase and will stop at nothing to get it back. Remember his name? No one? Professor Hinkle in Frosty the Snowman. All right, how about this guy? Some of you old school. Old school right here. He's the grouchiest and most hard-hearted man in Bedford, which makes George Bailey's life very difficult until he realizes how wonderful his life really is. This is Old Man Potter in It's a Wonderful Life. All right, I'm going to throw in a tricky one. Only certain people will get this. My kids might get this. This villain even scares the ghouls in Halloween Town with his cruel and unusual tendencies, especially when he captures Santa. This is Mr. Oogie Boogie and the Nightmare Before Christmas. And then I'll just say 2 words about the next one. Bah humbug. Ebenezer Scrooge. I chose this version of Ebenezer Scrooge to remind all of us parents, do not show your 5, 6, 7, 8-year-old this version of the Christmas Carol if you want them to sleep at night. Zach still refers to me innocently as his dad trying to do a good thing and taking him to the movie theater to see the Christmas Carol Jim Carrey version, not knowing that it would haunt his life. I think he was 8 years old at the time, so he still defines that as one of the scariest moments of his life, seeing Christmas Carol in the theater with Jim Carrey. Ebenezer Scrooge. And then, of course, the biggest villain of all, who do you think it's going to be? He's a mean one, Mr. Grinch. So this infamous villain obviously tries to steal Christmas from the happy citizens of Whoville, the Grinch. Villains are common in Christmas stories. It's what makes the Christmas stories that we watch, the movies we love, full of different types of drama. Every famous Christmas movie has some type of villain in it. The first Christmas story also includes an infamous and evil villain who was not a fictitious character in any way, but who desperately tried to eliminate Christ from Christmas. A trend that some would argue is not uncommon today, to try to eliminate Christ from Christmas. I always kind of get cracked up how we as Christians often try and counter trends like that with our bumper sticker and kind of Facebook post church sign theology. We love little cliches, don't we? Like, keep Christ in Christmas, and wise men still seek him, and Jesus is the reason for the season. All those things are true. How many of you honestly have one of those sayings on some type of piece of art or something in your home right now? All of us, right? Have something that says that in our house right now. Remember a couple years ago, there's a big dust-up about Happy Holidays versus Merry Christmas. People were told not to say Merry Christmas, to say Happy Holidays, and it caused quite a stir. I remember during that time wondering at the cashier that was checking me out at Target or whatever, are they going to say Happy Holidays or are they going to say Merry Christmas, right? And we kind of cheered for the ones that defied the system by saying Merry Christmas. During that same window of time, a lot of it came out of this. The American Secular Humanists Association, which is primarily atheists, they declared a godless holiday campaign. And their motto was, no God, N-O, no God, no problem. Be good for just goodness sake. So interesting twist by the American Secular Humanist Society. But if we're being honest, you can't take Christ out of Christmas. There's always a controversy about removing prayer out of school, and I used to always crack up that there will always be prayer in school as long as there are tests in school, right? And so the word Christmas itself is not going anywhere. It's around to stay. And to be honest, here's what I am way more concerned about. It is our tendency as followers of Jesus, as Jesus people, to live life as if there is no Christ. To piece together a life that is unaffected by Jesus. Or that Jesus is just one piece in our life puzzle. And sometimes we simply are doing good for goodness sake, to try to be a little better than those around us. Our text today, Matthew chapter 2, includes the stories of two different types of people. A group of seekers who are looking for a newborn promised king, and a tyrant who will eliminate anyone who poses a threat to his earthly kingdom, including a baby. And Jesus, the gospel says, was sent for both types of people. He was sent to save people from their sins, both villains and seekers. But only those villains and seekers who embrace the rule and reign of this king to be brought into his kingdom. So today we're going to focus on the original OG villain of the Christmas story, a guy named Herod. His story does not make Christmas cards, and you're not going to have him in your manger scene on your mantle. His story is often labeled the Massacre of the Innocents. Like not a title you want to include in your Christmas cards. If you do a Christmas newsletter, you may not want to include the Butcher of Bethlehem as a part of your Christmas newsletter. You see, this villain wanted to eliminate the Christ of Christmas. He had put his life together like a puzzle, and he tried to eliminate pieces that did not fit his life puzzle. King Herod was a man with some serious issues. But in reality, he was not so removed from us and the struggles that we face. His life puzzle contained some interesting and very familiar pieces that our life often tends to resemble. Let me mention just a few of those. He was a man of power. Power. Power is the effort to control my life in a way that primarily benefits me. And Herod was addicted to it, and he was possessed by it. There's three words that kind of describe and define his thirst for power and the power that he had. One is the word capable. Soon after becoming king, Herod wiped out several bands of kind of these guerrilla armies that were terrorizing the countryside. And then he used very subtle but intentional diplomacy to make peace with a lot of opposing parties. He was a very capable leader. His power was also very crafty, though. He arranged all of his human earthly relationships to benefit and increase his own power. If you did not benefit him or his agenda, you were out. He trusted no one. He was manipulative, which meant that his power, he was not only a capable, powerful leader, his power was not only very crafty, but he was also very cruel. You see, Herod held tightly to the reins of power and brutally eliminated anyone who got in his way. Roman history tells us that he killed thousands of people, including his own brother-in-law, his mother-in-law, two of his own sons, and even one of his wives. Herod murdered out of sheer spite, and he killed to just remain in power. He was a Game of Thrones king on steroids. He was a man of power, capable, crafty, cruel. The Roman historian Josephus called Herod barbaric, a malevolent maniac, and he said it is better to be his pig than one of his sons. He was a ruthless tyrant who was willing to do whatever necessary to maintain his power and control. So in terms of power, he was capable, crafty, cruel, and this is a very dangerous and deadly combination as a man of power. But not only was it about his power, but for Herod, it was about his possessions. He wanted it all. He wanted everything that a Roman Caesar enjoyed and more. Roman Caesars in that day were considered gods, and Herod wanted it all. He built 7 palaces for himself. He built a theater that seated 9,500 people. He built stadiums where literally hundreds of thousands of people could gather to celebrate his ceremonies and celebrate him. The older kids and I yesterday drove to Atlanta and watched a college basketball game. Carolina was playing Kentucky there, and so we went. It was at the State Farm Arena, which seats about 20,000 people. So Herod built a stadium that would accommodate almost upwards of 200,000 to 300,000 people to be able to bring worship to him. He constructed a brand new temple. He was consumed with his possessions and his desire for more and more and bigger and bigger. Man of power, man of possessions. He was a man of prestige. Herod wanted to make a name for himself. I mean, he labeled himself Herod the Great. I've tried to ask Ashley to call me Devin the Great, but it just hasn't happened yet. I think a response was somewhere along the lines of, do something great and I'll call you Devin the Great. No. Herod the Great. I need y'all to help me out with this. Tell her that's a great idea. Devin the Great. No. He built cities with state-of-the-art architecture for his time. He was a smooth-talking schemer who won over many of his enemies. He was married 10 times. I didn't say he was a wise man. He was married 10 times. Most of his marriages were for prestige. Most of them were for political advancement so that he could include his rivals into his own thirst for power. So he's a man of power, a man of possessions, a man of prestige, and he was a man of paranoia. He poisoned his own father. He bought his throne, basically. He had no pure bloodline descendant, which made him very paranoid on whether his kingdom would continue. And so he literally developed this elaborate network of spies, and he had 10 emergency fortresses spread throughout his portion of the Roman Empire that he built for himself to be able to escape if necessary. He trusted no one, and he killed any potential threat. Herod the Great ruled for more than 40 years. He was hated. He was feared. He ordered the execution of thousands of people at his death so that he would know that people were grieving when he died. He was a man who had no room for another king, no room for a Christ. And into his very dark and depraved world, the Son of God arrived as a child. We read the text. Now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, "Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him." So Herod is the ruler of Judea, and in Judea is the city of Bethlehem. And the Magi show up. And the Magi, who would have been accustomed to living with royalty and considered royal people themselves, they show up, of course, at the palace. I mean, where else would they go with this question? Where is the one who is born King of the Jews? We've come to worship him. Like they assume the birth of the Messiah would be known, that it would be a big deal, that there would be parades and celebrations. And so they go, what makes sense to them, to the palace, to the throne room of the king himself. Where is this one who has been born King of the Jews? Well, for a man like Herod, he was not interested in another king. Verse 3, when Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. This word troubled means to shake violently. It means he was rattled when he heard this news, because Jesus was a threat. Any king was a threat. By this time in Herod's life, he's near the end of his reign. He does not want drama. And so another king, he's rattled to the core. And then this interesting phrase, all of Jerusalem is afraid with him. Most likely they are afraid of what Herod might do. He's a cruel and vicious ruler. So verse 4, Herod puts a plan together. He assembles the chief priests and scribes of the people. He inquired of them where the Christ was to be born. They told him, in Bethlehem of Judea, for so it is written by the prophet, "And you, O Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for from you shall come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel." So Herod does a wise thing here. He calls together the religious leaders. He wants to get more intel on this king of the Jews. And the prophets, the religious leaders, say to him, hey, the prophets have spoken of this, and they said that the Messiah is to be born in Bethlehem. Verse 7, Herod summoned the wise men secretly and ascertained from them what time the star had appeared. And he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, "Go and search diligently for the child, and when you have found him, bring me word that I too may come and worship him." We know that last part is a lie. Herod has no intention of worshiping Jesus. He calls the Magi, "Go find him, let me know so I can worship him." There is some speculation here that maybe Herod is kind of tipping his hat to the Jewish God. This again would have been a very polytheistic culture, a lot of worship of many different types of gods. And so Herod's idea is like, if I can kind of get in favor with this Jewish God, then I'll do so. And so he sends the Magi on a mission. Go and find this Messiah and then let me know. Verse 9. After listening to the king, they went on their way. And behold, the star that they had seen when it rose went before them until it came to rest over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they rejoiced exceedingly with great joy. And going to the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother. They fell down and worshipped him. And opening their treasures, they offered him gifts, gold and frankincense and myrrh. And being warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they departed to their own country by another way. So the Magi find Jesus. By this time, Jesus is probably a toddler. They worship him, which is a fascinating scene that we'll look at next week. These men who are accustomed to walking with kings and princes and royalty, they are worshiping a toddler, giving their devotion to a toddler, to a child. So the Magi find Jesus, they worship him, and then God warns them, like, tell Joseph and Mary to flee, to go away, to go to Egypt. And then the wise men, because they are wise men, they go home a different route. That was a very wise move for them, not to go back to Herod. They were warned in a dream, and so they go home a different way. Bounce down to verse 16. Then Herod, when he saw that he had been tricked by the wise men, became furious. And here's how the man that I have described earlier reacts in these moments. And he sent and he killed all the male children in Bethlehem and in all that region who were 2 years old or under, according to the time that he had ascertained from the wise men. Herod learns what has happened. He's furious. And he orders all male children 2 and under in that region to be murdered. What an evil and cruel act. Can you imagine being the parent of an 18-month-old, a 1-year-old, a 6-month-old, a newborn, and this edict is brought forth into your area? All male children 2 and under will be murdered. This is Herod. This is the villain of the Christmas story. Verse 19, but when Herod died. Just 4 words. But when Herod died. You see, Herod lived completely for himself, and then he died. His life was over. He was so consumed with building and protecting his own kingdom that he had no space for Jesus. And in the end, it cost him everything. You see, we're not full-blown Herods in our actions. None of us, hopefully, are plotting to take out our brother-in-law or kill our mother-in-law. But all of us, in some way, have a little Herod that resides in our hearts. We live with what Tim Keller calls throne tension. Throne tension. Throne tension is who or what occupies the throne of my heart. Who or what is sitting on the throne of my heart? Throne tension. Who's going to be in control? Who's going to rule and reign in my life? And we also, like Herod, though different, we tend to live life consumed with or controlled by our own forms of power, possessions, prestige, and paranoia. We live, in many ways, consumed with powers. We are constantly trying to get it and keep it and leverage it for our own purposes. You see, you may not be a power monger like Herod, but we all, each of us, struggle with control issues. We don't like to be controlled. I don't want a king ruling and reigning over me, making demands on my life. And yet, following Jesus, in his words, is to relinquish control, to give up power, to follow him. See, I think for many of us, we don't mind a Jesus who is a piece of our life puzzle. We just don't want him to control our life. We want to give him some room, to give him some space, to mention him, to show up at church, to call ourselves Christians. But the idea of giving him complete control, like control of my relationships, control of my money, control of my job, control of my insecurities, to give him control of my struggles and my fears, to give him control of my kids, like to give him control of my future. And the result is that our lives are filled with worry and trying to get ahead and fears and uncertainties and jealousy and trying to one-up each other. You see, we sit on the throne of our own hearts and we try and piece together our lives like a puzzle. And Jesus is a piece of that puzzle, but he's only a piece of the puzzle. We'll include him, but for him to control it, to be in control and relinquish control to him, we all have a little Herod, don't we? Seeking to maintain our own power. What about possessions? Man, we just live in a culture in our own lives that are obsessed and consumed with what is temporary and what is visible, when what really matters in life is what is eternal and what is invisible. Our lives are often spent trying to balance what we have, right? A lot of times when we talk about possessions, we automatically kind of jump to trying to get more and obtain more and buy more and upgrade. Sometimes possessions controlling us is simply living life financially with no margin in our life. Did you know the average American does not live on 100% of their income? The average American lives on 110% of their income, which means they are living life upside down all the time, trying to balance, get more. And then we get a little bit more, somehow a raise or something comes our way, and what do? We're automatically trying to live life to the max. And so we would never say that we worship money or that money controls us, or we're not rich people, so I can't be a person controlled by possessions. But sometimes the control of possessions is simply causing me to live life with no financial margin in my life, and I'm trying to make ends meet and trying to scrape by to pay the bills, and I have no room in my heart to be generous in any way. I have no space to be generous. And generosity is the antidote to the greed that drives our culture. And yet we live life with possessions controlling us. How much can I afford? Can I squeeze this into my budget? Obsessed with the temporary. And of course, there is the temptation to get more, upgrade, measure up to the expectations of others. But either way, we are easily controlled by our possessions. And we're unable to be giving and generous people because possessions possess us. Jesus was pretty clear about this, wasn't he? Matthew 6, Jesus said, God and stuff can't occupy the throne of your heart. It is one or the other. Throne, tension. What about prestige? Prestige is the constant effort to get ahead, regardless of what I have to sacrifice. If I have to sacrifice my family, because I spend all my time trying to get ahead. If I have to sacrifice my friends, because I haven't allowed any margin in my life for development of relationships. If I have to sacrifice time, if I have to sacrifice even my character, trying to make a name for myself. Many times, I believe in our culture, it's even through my kids. Like, well, I wasn't a great baseball player, but man, if I can make my kid a great sports athlete. Man, I wasn't this, or I wasn't successful at this, but man, my child maybe can be. And so we often play this out through a lot of different avenues in our lives. Prestige. I was thinking about this week, and I was kind of processing this. Like if someone were to say to someone else in your life, tell me about you. Tell me about Devin. And they were to ask that person, tell me about Devin Hudson. What do you know about him? And I'm not listening. Like, what does my reputation with other people say about my priorities? Tell me about this person. And that response, that answer to that question, what would that answer say about the things that are most important in your life? Because that's the image that you're giving off to the friends, family, coworkers, the people that know you. You're creating a persona of who you are to them. What are the things, are we allowing prestige to sit on the throne of our hearts? Power, possessions, prestige. What about the idea of paranoia? This is the failure to trust God, a fear of trusting God, of failing to rest in who He is, especially trusting God when He seems distant or removed or mysterious. How could God allow this or this to take place? Like, we all wrestle with these questions, don't we? Like, God seems really distant from me, or is there a God? And should I take my faith serious? And what about this mysterious element of God? We kind of live with this fear of going all in, of trusting God completely with our lives. And so really the question for us is, do I really trust God in all areas of my life? Do I trust God with my family? Do I trust God with my relationships? Do I trust God with my finances? Do I trust God with my future? Another pointed question when we think about this. What am I doing in my life right now that requires absolute faith? What am I doing? What decision? What am I processing? What is God taking me through that requires absolute faith, where I can't control it? You say faith requires me to relinquish control and trust. I have to trust in someone outside of me, my own abilities, my money in my bank, my skills, the things I have, my ability to adjust and adapt. What in my life is requiring me to live in absolute faith, to relinquish control and trust God? See, we all have little Herods sitting on the thrones of our heart, trying to control our lives. And the question is, what if I removed Jesus from my life? What if I removed Jesus from my life? What would change about my life if the Jesus piece were taken away? What would change? And the answer to that question reveals the throne tension. It reveals who occupies the throne of my heart. You see, if Jesus is just a piece of the puzzle, even if he's a bigger piece of your puzzle, if Jesus is a piece of the puzzle and you lost that piece, would your life really look any different? Outside of just now, I got a couple of more hours on Sunday morning. There's a few people maybe I won't see again. Would your life really look different in the day by day, the everyday, from what it is right now if Jesus were taken away? Or maybe it would look just a little different. You see, the reality of the Jesus story and the message and the gospel is that Jesus does not want to just fit in our lives like a piece to a puzzle. Jesus is king. He is King of kings. He wants control. He wants to occupy the throne of our hearts and lives. And here's the good news of the gospel. The gospel teaches us that when Jesus leads, when Jesus is in control, when we are able to rest in who he is, that is what enables us to live life to the fullest. To live life with purpose and meaning and intention. When he rules and reigns in my heart and life, then I can relinquish control to him. I can give up this kind of insatiable thirst for more and bigger and better. I can give up the constant pursuit of stuff. I can give up the endless effort to make a name for myself. You see, when he leads, I can trust that he is sovereign, that he is good, that he is loving. When he leads, I can stop trying to earn his favor or to work for his acceptance. When he leads, I can trust him. I can trust him with my family. I can trust him with my finances. I can trust him with my future because I know that this king is sovereign and good and righteous and he can be trusted. So which king are we serving today? Of what do I need to relinquish control to keep Christ not at just the center of Christmas, but to keep Christ at the center of my entire life? Here's the good news of the gospel for you today. I'm coming here to try to beat you up in these different areas. We all have these little Herods in our hearts that we're struggling with, right? But here's the heart of the gospel. Jesus came for all of us Herods. He came for the Herods just like you and just like me. He came to rescue villains. He came to save sinners. And that's the beauty of the gospel. You see, we do not overcome the throne tension by trying harder, by doing more, by checking some magical list that makes us the right type of Christian so that God will be pleased with us. We overcome the throne tension by surrendering all of who we are to Christ. It is a constant reminder, day in and day out, I will rest in you. What you have done for me is enough. You are the king of my life. Now, if you're like me, it's a constant wrestling match, isn't it? Like, I know tomorrow at some point, Devin's going to try to occupy the throne of the heart again. I'm going to try to crawl back up there and control it and take the reins and try to figure it out and make it happen on my own. And I'll have to be reminded of the gospel again, of what Jesus has done for you is enough. You can trust him. You can rest in him. Living life in him is living life to the fullest with meaning and purpose. And so as we grapple and struggle and wrestle with the little Herods that are constantly seeking to occupy the throne of our heart, my challenge and encouragement for us today as we cling to the good news of the gospel, that even the most vile, wicked villain that resides in our hearts, that the good news of the gospel is that Christ is bigger and better than the little Herods that seek to live and rule and reign in our hearts and lives. Let's trust him. And let's keep Christ not just at the center of Christmas, but let's keep Christ at the center of life. Let's bow our heads for prayer.